Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome.
Interview.
Thank you for joining us today. My name's Keanan Duffty. I'm the director of the MPS in Fashion Management, which launches this fall at Parsons School of Fashion. And I'm very excited today to welcome a very illustrious panel, several of whom have traveled far and wide to get here today. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves in a second. And Jeff Carvalho from HighSnobiety is very kindly going to moderate this panel for us. The first thing I want to say is fashion is really a kind of team sport, and putting a day like today together takes a lot of effort from many people. And I just want to thank Savannah Kustra and Vanessa Cruz-Ruiz, who I don't know if they're in the room, actually. Vanessa's over there. Thank you very much for all your hard work in pulling this together. Also to our M&C team, our marketing communication team, for getting the word out, and to Will Wilbur for getting the message out to the press, and to Barak Shamak, our Dean of Fashion at Parsons School of Design. So the fashion management program is a new program for Parsons, and the idea of it is to have or to deliver 5-week intensives that are specific to leadership in fashion, to the business of fashion, to marketing, merchandising, and those sort of ancillary areas of fashion. And we're very excited to launch it with these really great 5-week intensives that are going to have partners from the industry baked into each intensive. So the idea of today is to give any prospective applicants to the program a flavor of what this is going to look like once the program launches, and the kind of caliber of participants that will be involved. Parsons has an underlying core ethos of inclusivity, diversity, sustainability, and many of the elements of social justice that are really propelling all aspects of creativity today, both in the fashion industry and way beyond. And we wanted to start with the first panel this morning to really talk about leadership in the fashion industry and beyond, and what that really means, and how these great industry professionals have started from positions that maybe many of you are in right now, which is in the beginnings of your career as a student or about to embark on a learning experience, and how they've kind of risen through the industry into very, very prominent positions, leadership roles, and what their thinking is, what their ethos is, and how that career arc has looked. So I'd really love you to put your hands together and welcome our illustrious panel. And thank you for joining us. And over to Jeff.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. I may take this off just to make it a little bit more casual for us here, but thanks for having me. I'm Jeff Carvalho. I'm Managing Director of HighSnobiety, and I'm really happy to join you guys here for this panel on leadership. Before I introduce our guest, we're really here for you guys. A lot of the panelists that are on stage have flown quite some distance to be here to talk to you and to have a conversation with you. So I'd love for this to kind of go both ways. We'll open it up to QA toward the end, but if you have any questions in the middle, put your hand up and we'll do our best to get to you. So with that, I'd love to really quickly introduce our panelists. And please share with these guys, who you are, where you've been, and where you've come from. Raoul, Shah at the end from Exposure, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me, everybody? Maybe I'll take it off. Do the same as you.
Go Rockstar, take it off.
Here we go. Need a headset, like Madonna. I'm Raoul Shah. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Exposure, and I started my career, I guess, working in a store. I graduated from Manchester University in the UK. Couldn't get a job, didn't know what I wanted to do. I studied textiles and ended up going to Paris, convincing my family that going to Paris would automatically mean I would learn to speak French. I actually worked at Agnès B in Paris and in the men's store, and because I spoke English, they put me on the top floor and I dealt with all the Japanese customers. So I learned no French, but I had a great time in 1988, this is. But one thing I knew is that I wanted to work in London, and I just constantly spent all my time from Paris writing to everyone and anyone I knew, or people who knew potential contacts. And I eventually got myself a job at Pepe Jeans, spent 5 years working for them, went from a graduate trainee to eventually being a marketing director. And as the company was being sold, I decided it was time to move on, and I knew I didn't want a boss. I definitely didn't know I wanted to lead anything, but that was really the beginnings and sort of foundations of how I started Exposure. Sort of fell into it in 1993, and I wouldn't want to say the rest is history because there's quite a lot of it, but I think I'll come back to some references as we keep going.
We'll definitely dig in.
Thank you.
Claudia Cividino, joining us from Loro. Please tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So, hi, my name is Claudia Cividino. I'm the CEO of Loro Piana for North America. And look, I was sitting in your seats. I had gotten a business degree because I knew that I had to do the right thing. But my real aim was to come to New York City and study fashion design, which I did. And I graduated fashion design school, and I realized I have no business being a fashion designer, but I love this industry. And I was, and so I was hired by Ferragamo. I did a really long stint at Barneys, which I loved. And then the universe shone down on me, and I received a call from Paris, from a recruiter in Paris, and said, we'd like to fly you to meet Mr. Pierre Berger, who was the business partner and lover of Mr. Saint Laurent. And this is before Yves Saint Laurent was really in the US. So I was hired to launch the US for Yves Saint Laurent back in 1999. And I ended up staying with the company for 10 years after the acquisition by Gucci, which became the Gucci Group, which later became Kering. And anyway, I went on to launch, I was hired by the Coach organization, and I launched the Reed Krakoff brand, which was a great adventure. I've worked for the Prada Group, and I most recently was at Bally. And in the context of really one of the oldest luxury brands, only second oldest after Hermes, a startup project within the context of a luxury brand. And so what I'm really passionate about is this idea of entrepreneurial thinking in the context of something that is somewhat historic. And yeah.
Thank you so much. Dylan Jones from Editor-in-Chief of British GQ. Welcome.
Hi.
Can you give these students and prospects sort of how you came to the role you're in?
Yeah, sure. I've always had. I've been always incredibly. I've never had any tactics. I've never had any sort of idea of what I wanted to do. All I knew that I wanted to do from the age of 12 was go to art school. That was about as strategic as I was. And I went to Chelsea School of Art. Then I went to St Martin's School of Art. I had a fantastic time. They're both right in the centre of London, the middle of punk, where all the clubs were. I just had the best time. And as soon as I left, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. I thought I was going to be a photographer. I was a terrible photographer. And I ended up being, I was working as a barman in a nightclub called The Fridge, which was quite famous at the time. I was a film extra. I shoot down Roger Moore's plane in Octopussy.
Amazing.
You're welcome, by the way. Yeah, thanks. And then I was at the age of 22, and basically I was getting up about 4 o'clock in the afternoon in order to have one meal a day, watch a bit of TV before going out to a nightclub, and I became very good at that.
It's a great profession.
And then I got a call from a friend of mine, a better photographer, more successful photographer, saying he was taking some pictures for a magazine called ID, which has just launched, and if I wasn't doing anything, could I come along and interview the people he was photographing? I had nothing to do, so I went along and interviewed the people. And at that stage, the level of sophistication of the questions was, what colour are your socks and how much do you hate Margaret Thatcher? Anyway, I did this thing, and I got offered a job. And as soon as I got the job, I realised that I never wanted to do anything else, and I've pretty much done that on a variety of magazines and newspapers since.
Amazing. And ID back then, let's be honest, that was more of a zine, that first issue, right? It was a red cover.
Is that a pejorative thing? Are you saying
No, I
is that
think
a
it's
good thing
amazing
or a
because
bad thing?
Well, we can get into it, but it kind of gets into the DIY of how everyone was kind of really pushing their way through.
No, this was at the dawn of the 80s, where 3 magazines in the space of that launched in the space of 3 months started to define the decade, and it was ID, The Face, and Blitz, and it was an extraordinary time to be in publishing because we rather conceitedly thought that we were sort of part of the content.
Sure.
But it was great because they were very small groups of people, and it was all about the creativity. The commercial aspects were a kind of byproduct, really. It was very refreshing.
And there's a lot of analog to what's happening today with how influencers on social media kind of play into the story as well now, too. But we'll get into it.
Social influencers.
That's it. Christopher Lacy joins us. Tell the folks about the work that you did at Barneys.
Thank you so much. So I am formally the director of customer experience and development at Barneys. I've taken the risk to venture out and do my own thing, which is nice. I have to be honest, when I got into this industry, for me, it was not purposeful. I did not get into it because I loved fashion. I loved people and wanting to understand them. And so my first job was with Armani. And I actually went to art school at California Institute of the Arts in Valencia. And while there working for Armani, I transitioned and started working for Hugo Boss and understood menswear. And then I kind of got this passion that I understood that I really loved this business, but I loved the business because of how people interacted with it. And I understood that for myself, the reason I loved fashion is because every morning I would wake up with a different personality because I'm a Gemini. And I could dress myself any type of way I wanted to, and that's why people gravitated to it. And so my career progressed because I understood consumer behavior and why people interacted, and was then asked to join Gucci. And so I was with Gucci for quite some time, moving back to Dallas, and then with Gucci here in New York, then working for Donna Karan, and then Barneys New York. So that's really kind of how the trajectory happened. None of it was intentional. It was all accidental, and that's about
Sure.
how that went.
Thank you. And just to throw the mix into it, I actually went to pharmacy school before getting into the music industry, and then eventually to getting my journalism degree and working for HighSnobiety as well. So, but the one thing that we all have in common, and that you guys all have in common, is this idea of a journey, right? You talked about wanting to get to New York. You talked about wanting to get to a specific school, and it's not that dissimilar from the journey that a lot of the folks in this audience are here experiencing themselves. So, in terms of like what you were aspiring to and what the goal was, Raoul, in thinking about the work that you did in Paris, was it that you wanted to go work for Agnes in the shop, or you just wanted to get into the mix?
I think it was the latter. I think, I knew broadly what environment I wanted to be in. I liked fashion. I'd studied textiles, so I had some degree of, empathy perhaps with the industry. But I think over and above all of that, around that time, my brother had, he got married, and we were in Kenya, which is where my parents are from. And one of the really, really good friends of my parents, who's an artist from India, was with us. And I remember saying to him, I said, "Why do you paint? What made you want to be a painter?" And he said, "I love people." And I use this quote a lot at work with my team, but I kind of found it so like kind of spiritual in terms of why something as simple as that leads to an artist's career for, in his case, 6 decades. And I thought, I kind of like that belief and that system around people, the belief system around, having certain values, sharing those values, and remaining kind of clear to what your values are, which you then instill into a business, was something that's kind of stuck with me forever. And so I think, whilst falling into the career, there was a couple of common denominators, and being naturally, I guess, predisposed to wanting to be surrounded by great people and knowing that you can always learn more from the people around you, and ideally having better people than you around you, is a real privilege and a motivation. Being
able to learn from others. A lot of what you're talking about is really this idea of networking, really getting out there and going to the party, going to meet somebody that's in the industry. Dylan and Claudia, I wonder if you had the same experiences. Dylan, it sounds very much like that. You fell into the work you were doing And maybe it was, I'm curious, was it a surprise to you that this could be a job, or that this could be a way for you to output your creative energy?
It was a surprise, actually, yeah. Because, as I say, the whole, what we were doing was sort of, it stemmed from the clubs, it stemmed from people. There's a whole generation of people who were musicians, fashion designers, stylists, videographers, journalists, etc., etc., etc.
People loosely refer to that as the culture sometimes, right?
Yeah, and we were all young. We were all in our early 20s. And we really did think that what we were doing was incredibly important. And I don't think it was as important as we thought it was, but it was actually important. I think that something that Raoul said was interesting, is that as soon as this became as soon as I was in it and I realized that this is what I wanted to do and I wanted to get better at it, and I realized I was in a very lucky place. You become contextualized by people around you, and you said something about working with interesting people, and I remember I became the editor of the magazine quite quickly, about a year later, and I remember someone had sent something in, and I was so intimidated by this person, I didn't give them a job. And as soon as I did that, I realized that I'd done a terrible thing. So ever since then, I've tried to hire people who are better than me. They might not have my experience. That's fine. You don't get experience is time.
Right.
But I've always tried to hire. If someone, that's ridiculous insecurity of not hiring someone because they're better than you. Some people still do that, and I was lucky enough to make that mistake very early.
Yeah. Claudia, building off of Dylan's point about experience, I'd love to tap into that a little bit, because I firmly believe, and I think you all would agree with me, that being a leader is not something that comes overnight. And certainly this idea of experience, at least for my generation, felt sort of part of the norm. But in today's world where things move much quicker, it sometimes feels like the timelines get shorter, but the idea of experience still is something that's important. Claudia, I'd love for you to talk about the importance of it in sort of your growth as well, and I'll put that to the rest of you as well.
There's no question. I'm not the same leader I was even 2 years ago. And it's been really a process of maturing your own wisdom, in my experience. And really what I mean by that is that it took me a while to understand, why am I really doing what I'm doing? And what it came down to, though I didn't really get that until, 5 years ago, honestly, was at the end of the day, my real passion is to impact society through business, and to impact business through people. And that's why I do what I do. When I first started, I did what I did because I loved the product. I loved fashion. But that's not what turns on my lights every day today. And so it's just been a fascinating evolution. And I think that for me, the key has just been this kind of endlessly curious mind. And I think in the context of having an endlessly curious mind about whatever it is that you deeply love, that's the seed of innovation. And so those are the people I also look for as I build teams and work to build businesses, is people who are deeply curious about what's around the corner, because I know that they are the innovators.
Christopher, any thoughts on that? And I just want to add to it, there's always this beautiful veil of what we do to the outside world sometimes. And that goes for everyone here. But behind that curtain, there is a lot of hard work. And as Claudia mentioned, people tend to be, what move the needle here. It's never, in my opinion, it's not about the company. It's about the company's values, maybe, but the people and how you can instill them those values. I'd love for you to, talk about sort of the people in your life that have helped instill those values through your career.
Yeah, I have to be honest, I've been very fortunate with quite a few of the leaders I've had because they've allowed me the ability to make the mistakes that I've made and not lost their minds over it. And so I learned from them in that way. But I think from that, what I gain the most when we talk about the people component is, I would say probably like 8 years ago, maybe between 6 or 8 years ago, I came to the conclusion that I could only lead people better if I knew how to lead myself. And quite often, I don't think we really understand what that means to lead yourself. And it means that moment you wake up in the morning, you're going to have that quietness to understand, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is my intent? And how does my intent affect other people? And I think a lot of times when people are looking at leaders, they think that you wake up and you're like, this is what I'm doing today. I know it. And it's going to go just like this and everything's going to be fine. And, and that we're like sitting in our offices, like, doing what have you, and that there's no stress. And so the truth is that there's a lot of internal work that has to go on for us to be able to lead people appropriately, because there's that emotional component that you just have that's there to be able to connect.
I'm curious to know if there was a moment in your careers where you got to a place where you were working with a certain number of people where you had to kind of turn on leadership. You had to recognize that now you had to help sail the ship a little bit. Have any of you had that experience, and maybe share with that? What was that like?
I think leadership's all about confidence. I think that I didn't set out to be a leader. I set out to be creative, and that's the thing that keeps me going. Now, the thing that keeps me now is being creative, but also being successful.
Right.
Because if you're not successful, no one sees that you're being creative. That's crucial. But yeah, I think it's about setting a course and bringing people with you. I think it's all about that. I think you also, as an employer, well, and also as someone who has worked and still works for other people, I think it's crucial to understand people's motivations. Why are you doing that job? Why are you in that position? What do you want from life? What are not necessarily what are your values, but why are you doing what you're doing? Because if you understand that, you pretty much understand every decision they make. And if you have to manage upwards, that's very important too, because you can anticipate it.
Raoul?
Yeah, I was going to say that for us, I think the moment where you sort of switch to perhaps the realization that you've got this responsibility and you need to kind of lead and take on, the good, but there's a lot of other sides to leading that are not as interesting. There are things like running a business that involves, finances, for example. What I realized is that for us at Exposure, the whole kind of purpose ultimately came down to the culture. I loved what I did. I graduated similarly to Dylan, actually, at a time in London when, I graduated through a lens of kind of incredible kind of moments in club culture, music, and style magazines. So for me to be sort of able to access and continually be able to surround myself with some of those kind of inspirations from that early point, all led me towards wanting a business that was representative of something that existed in the culture that we were in and the culture we continue to be a part of. So I think there was an article the Times once wrote about our agency, and they described the place as better than being at home. And that was the day that I realized that I had a responsibility to do something at work beyond looking at the numbers, beyond looking at the kind of P&L. And I thought, get a good accountant, get a good HR director, get all the people that can do their jobs brilliantly, and I should just focus on a sort of value set and a cultural belief system that becomes, the reason why I still go to work and treat every day like the first. I love it.
Part of leadership is knowing when to ask for help or knowing when you need help. And to your point, it's when you know that, quite honestly, I'm just not good at that job. I should be focused on something. To younger students or those that are coming into the workforce now, how clear or not do they need to know what they want to do? And how important or not is it to allow them to have that exploratory time? I tend to refer to that as internships sometimes. You know, being able to go and have time spent within organizations like yours just to understand what it takes to happen on the inside. So I'd love for you each, if you could, what is the importance, again, we're talking about experience here, what's the importance of the internship process and being able to have a purview into a variety of different views?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical. I think that creative, and you know, we live in such a speedy world. Like, speed is so important to how we function today. And yet, when I look at someone who's younger, who's in their formative years of their career, and they come and see me, I really emphasize the importance of taking your time and exploring. I love to offer internships in the company because I think that the opportunity to work in various departments to understand what you're really passionate about or where you see yourself fitting is critical. And that takes time, and it takes also space. I don't think you can rush that, but I think it's a real important seed for your ability down the road to become really ultimately a master of your craft, whatever you choose that craft to be.
You know, I would have to say the tricky part about where you are right now is you've spent your school years with, at the beginning, you being really good at something, and then everyone's focusing on you and telling you have to be good at something else. So if you're really good at literature, but you're not that great at math, you need a math tutor, you need to focus on math, focus on the thing that you're not good at, focus on it, focus on it, focus on it. Now you're here, and now you're like, well, now I have to establish my craft, and everyone, and people are like, really focus in on that and lean into that. And so by the time you're done, you don't know what to do because you're like, I know that I need to be good at something else to fit here, but I don't want to just be singular. And I think the really important thing to do is understand that you're not a singular being. So it's okay to be talented at multiple things, and it's okay to change your mind. And you only kind of get that through those internship moments, those moments where you're working in an atmosphere and you go, I thought I went to school for this, but guess what? I can't stand it. You know, and that was me. Like I wanted to be a dancer for years, and that's what I went to school to be a dancer. And then when I was like, I just, my body's tired. And you just didn't want to do the auditions anymore. But you have to let yourself be okay with changing your mind.
We try and take as many interns and work placement people as possible. I just think it's a great opportunity. In our country, you're sort of demonized for doing this. But we try and encourage as many people as possible. But I think slightly different about this. What we're looking for is people who can get things done.
A Swiss Army knife?
What do you mean?
I use the term Swiss Army knife loosely, but the idea that, you know, you're somebody that can do a variety of things. You know, you're multifaceted.
I mean, people use that awful expression, skill sets. I mean, I sort of, when people arrive, I say, great, nice to meet you, fantastic. Any problems, come and see me. And I sort of don't want to talk to them again. I just want them to get things done. No. I'm not being dismissive, because if they are good, they will work. I'll give you an example. There used to be a guy called Andy, real name, who came in to do a work placement, and you can only do 6 months because legally you're not allowed to employ them for 6. He was so brilliant that after every 6 months we would say, bye Andy, take him around the building, and he'd come in again and he'd work for another 6 months. He was fantastic. But the thing is, he was so irritating. Literally, he got to the stage where it's like, well, he would volunteer for everything. But the point is, he got things done. So there came a point when we would have conversations about projects we were doing and said, well, give it to Andy. And then one day, Andy wasn't there anymore. So we got Andy back again. And he ended up becoming the editor of our website quite quickly. He's got an amazing career now. But it was, you want someone to come in to be able to do stuff. Because I always say, if you can exist in our office, you can work in any office. I mean, unless you're an expert, you know, and you're in engineering, or you're in medicine, or you're flying planes, etc., etc., etc. But in media, in our worlds, all you want is someone to get something done.
Yeah, I think we've had our fair share of Andy's exposure, and we've had people who have come in for internships, and some of the team might even be here, but who've gone on to become really, really senior members of our team relatively quickly as well. And I think we see internships as your point's a very important one. It takes time. You don't come in and just go, right, I want to sit at this desk and have an office. Come in and you've got to do your apprenticeship, because it doesn't just kind of happen. It doesn't happen as quickly as your Instagram feed gets updated. But the other thing I'd say is that for those of you that are embarking on potential internships or looking for places to work, it's sometimes better to try as many things as possible, because I think, to Christopher's point, it's actually more important to know what you don't want to do, because you'll figure out what you want to do after. I found out I really found my kind of groove probably 10 years after I started working. I didn't really know what I was doing most of the time. I just kind of kept doing the things I liked most, and that ended up becoming sort of a specific skill. But I think figuring out what you don't want to do quite quickly is important, and you're only going to be able to do that by getting experience in a different sort of environment, a series of different environments.
Sure. And if I can share my Andy story, we have, and he just left us, funny enough, to go to the West Coast, but we had an intern photo assistant by the name of Thomas Welch, who, within a year, we really saw the talent he had, and he pushed harder than everybody. And within 2 years, he was shooting Pusha T for our cover. He was shooting Takashi Murakami, and he's become a great photographer, not because of HighSnobiety or the time that I've drilled into him, but really his own ability to, just keep pushing and kind of go through a variety of lanes to find what he wanted, which I thought was great. Fashion leadership is changing, and just the whole realm of fashion is really turned over, quite honestly. And I'm wondering, in the broader view of things, what is leadership, say, within the world that we operate in, touching style and fashion, as compared to other industries? Or are there no differences? Or is being a leader something that's clear across the board?
From my point of view, it's all about the ability to handle disruption. And I think if you take the industry that I'm in, I work for a legacy publisher who is now in, take our own brand. We still produce 14 magazines a year, but we have a website that's updated every 5 minutes. We have an inordinate amount of social feeds. We do events. It's the job that you do now is very different from the job that you would have done 10 years ago. And I don't think everyone has to be a soothsayer. I think I defy anyone to tell me or to espouse where media is going to be in 5 years' time, because even the people who are paid to know don't know anything
I would love
about
to know.
That. But you have to be able to think and move very, very quickly. That's what you need.
Failure is something that people don't like to talk about, but it's something that's quite important, I think, to personal development and growth. Certainly for me. I've had businesses fail across the board. I did not join HighSnobiety until I was 32, so I had plenty of failures before then. I'd love for you each to share maybe a moment where you had a moment where you took an L, but you rose above it, and how that empowered you or bettered you in your careers.
Sure. The failures often make the most entertaining stories, actually.
Sure.
I think one of the things that sort of comes from the previous comments, which leads me into sort of story about failing to do things, is that leadership is so non-linear. There is no kind of sort of beginning, middle, and end. And whilst it's a continuum, it's a complete daily kind of what the world throws at you, what the business throws at you, what your team or your clients throw at you. And I think you need to find time. You need to be quite sort of zen about leadership. And there's, finding time is quite difficult, because you're trying to do everything and you're trying to lead and answer everyone's questions. And, I think our biggest kind of weaknesses as a business have been, and our failures have come when we've tried to take on too much. And then we lose our ability to lead, because we are actually herding cats, which is not a leadership strategy. And what happens is you're trying to put yourself around too many things. We've done that by trying to open offices in too many places at the same time. We've tried to diversify into, we work with a lot of big global fashion brands. We've tried to move into luxury. That was, not thought through enough, and it was, again, a distraction. We got into talent management about 10 years ago. We represented Helena Christensen for about 2 years, and we ended up after 2 years with one client, Helena Christensen. That wasn't really leadership or a growth strategy. It was just having a client. But we were thinking we were getting into talent. So I think, the failures are good in terms of, resetting reality. They make you kind of reassess what you've got. And I think the key to that is never to take your eye off the ball. When you know what you're good at, you have got to disproportionately invest in the things that are the defining parts and sort of facets to your business. And everything else is exciting and interesting at the beginning, but it's not always that much fun when it goes wrong. And then you take your eye off the ball, like I said, and that can put a lot of disruption into the business.
Great advice. Anyone else?
Yeah, I fail every day, honestly, at something, and I'm okay with that. But I would say that I had a situation about a decade ago. I was fired from my job, and I'll tell you, and I don't speak really. For a long time, I didn't speak to anyone about that because I had so much shame about being fired. Like I had fundamentally failed with a capital F. And it is only after years after that experience, I didn't work for a year. I thought my life was over. I thought my career was over. And it's so funny now because looking back, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me personally, professionally, as a leader. There's no way that I would have had the learnings and the insights unless I had gone through that. So I'm a big proponent of failure. Yeah, I think it's really important.
I think exactly the same thing. I was fired once, and I was so scared of never being hired again. I worked so hard. I just got out there and I hustled and I hustled and I hustled. And exactly the same, I feel exactly the same way. Say you're fired, big deal. I mean, you just move on.
It hurts a little bit, though.
It hurts, but no one died, And I think that we're also we're also sort of self-obsessed in our respective industries, and it's like people get fired, just move on. And I think you're so right. And we indulge ourselves thinking, God, that was terrible, but it's not that terrible. You just you get another job eventually, hopefully.
Funny enough, exactly, and that was my experience when I was at Gucci. I'd been with Gucci for so many years, and in 2008, it was like the terrible recession, and nobody was buying anything, and so they were like, "Hey, we're gonna get rid of your position. If you want, you could go run Westchester." And I was like, "Absolutely not. That's just not a thing." And I'll never forget when I walked out, and I was like, I don't even know, like, how did I mess that up? Like, was I not strategizing my business correctly? Like, what was it? And I went into a state, and it's just really funny that in that moment it seemed like it was the worst thing that could have happened to me, and yet the team at Gucci brought me on board at Barneys just because of my reputation of being a very good strategist and understanding. So, but really quick to failure, I urge you, because I did this thing when I turned 35. I wrote down everything that I thought was the worst thing that could have happened to me, going all the way back to age 15. And what I then did after that, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm still alive. Like, it wasn't so bad, because in that moment, you can only see that moment. And that's the coolest thing about failure, is that when it's happening, you're like, oh my gosh. But then a month later or 2 months later, you're like, oh, wait, I'm all right. And you have to do that. So do that exercise for sure.
And first of all, thank you so much for you guys for sharing. That's quite personal what you shared with us. But I think what you're really touching on is the fact that, it's not the end of the world. And if you can turn it into a positive, and clearly in the case of all of you, it has. And you can see that sometimes the world brings you some hard shit, but you got to keep on moving. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'd love to open up the question, but before I go there, I wanted to talk about a topic that's been really heavy around sort of diversity and, the amount of women that we have within the fashion world, or at least that are rising to the ranks in leadership roles. And is there anything we can do to further empower young women to really, push and make the moves through? What can we all do to help there?
I've got something to say about this, which is probably not what you want to hear, but I am Condé Nast used to be, I think 96% of the people who worked for Condé Nast were women. So I was very much in the minority. However, as the world has exploded in a digital fashion, all the geeks are guys. That's a huge problem. And our gender split has changed enormously because of that. And that's a huge concern. It's a real concern.
I think we have to look at it just in a much bigger picture, in the sense that, yes, there is the gender inequality that happens, but we also have to be truthful about every conversation around inequalities, whether it is gender, whether it's race, no matter what it is, whether it's even someone's size, like someone who is a plus size person trying to work in the fashion industry. That's a scary state of affairs, let's be honest. So I think we have to start being truthful about the situation, and I think fashion companies have done a very good job of, let's create an inclusion and diversity program. I mean, right now I would say I think it was quoted that $8 billion now has been spent in corporations on inclusion and diversity programs. But in most of those companies, people are resisting those inclusion and diversity programs because the communication around it is not truthful. And so we have to be truthful about who and what our industry is doing at this point. Otherwise, we'll just be spinning our wheels in the same spot.
I think the industry takes a huge amount of responsibility for, promoting and ensuring diversity and related issues are higher up the agenda. But I think, sometimes it's a bit like sustainability or the environment. There was a time when it was a good thing to talk about, but it wasn't necessarily good for business. And I think people made it a great talking point. But to re-engineer a business to stop, let's say, using plastic, or to re-engineer a whole industry where diversity doesn't become this kind of abstract thing over here, and we actually get right on top of it and deal with it and make it part of, it no longer becomes a conversation, is commercially challenging. And I think, businesses need to be prepared to sort of re-engineer their businesses from the inside out, so that this doesn't constantly become a sort of thing over there. It becomes, a historic moment which has been addressed by the companies that can make the biggest impact, which are the global brands.
Thank you.
So I wanted to let the men speak before I did. Good strategy?
I knew that was your strategy.
Oh, gosh. Honestly, it's a mother of a topic. I think, and it doesn't matter. You can talk about any industry. It's not just fashion. I can count on these two hands the number of female CEOs sitting at the top of Fortune 500 companies. So I think that there's no question that we have something that needs to be addressed. And as in all things, it's how do we get there? So I don't have the answer. I can tell you that I spend a lot of time working with young women to help their process, to make them visible. But I do that with anybody who's talented, and honestly, even young men, all the time. So, yeah, I think we've got work to do.
Just got to keep on working.
Just got to keep on working, man.
One personal question before we jump to questions. Again, I'd love for you guys to ask away. They've come a long way for you, so. But really quickly, in short form, somebody's been a mentor in your life, to each of you.
Her name is Rebecca Jobo. She's amazing. She's now working for a company in Dubai. But I would tell you the thing about her that made her so amazing was I've never known somebody who was so strategically thinking but could connect with people on an emotional level. And you don't get that much. And she did it so well. That's her.
Terry Jones, who is a legend in our industry, who started ID Magazine in 1980. My first boss, still a very, very good friend of mine, and has got the best work-life balance of anyone I've ever met.
We haven't even touched on that. We have to do that another time, but that balance is a great topic.
Yeah. Lou Frankfurt, the current chairman of Coach, but the former CEO of Coach, I really took that Reed Krakoff job because of him. Working under him was like getting a master's degree. It was just, he's genius. Just awesome leader.
For me, it was my first real boss, who was the founder of Pepe Jeans, Nitin Shah, who just made it okay for us to try anything. He gave us a safe environment to try, fail, screw things up, and it was never, a career ending in a moment. It was always like, no problem, we can fix it. And I think that anything's possible attitude that he instilled in me then is probably resides today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. Please, I'd love to open it up for questions. I know there's a lot of stuff that we didn't touch on.
Oh, my voice projects. I don't know. Do I have to stand too?
No, but tell us your name at least.
My name's Carmen. This was such a meaningful panel. I just feel so grateful. It was a last-minute invitation, and all of you have said such meaningful, impactful things that you don't always get at these kinds of panels, so thank you so much. Nervous. I loved so much what you were saying about, and a couple of you were talking about this, but about really having to try a lot of different things and discover what you love and what you don't love and what you're great at and what you're not so great at. And I feel like I've been doing that for like the better part of my adult life. And it's been kind of a struggle. But I really feel like I'm really finding what really sets me on fire now, like you were talking about. And but I would just ask, and I'm hoping that some other folks can relate to this. I don't know if I'm really what you would consider a young woman, I mean, I'm a little bit older, and I am wondering what you might say to someone who is maybe hasn't had the sort of traditional trajectory in terms of corporate experience and things like that, but who has more of an entrepreneurial background and has amazing experience and has learned so much and has a fantastic skill set. Sorry to offend with the term, but but who doesn't have that sort of traditional, conventional resume that all of the job postings seem to be looking for, but has creative vision and drive and talent to offer.
Do you guys mind if I step into that?
Yeah.
So I went. Again, as I mentioned, I didn't actually start working for HighSnobiety until I was 32, and I'm 43 now. So I've been in this for 10 years. I went to pharmacy school in the mid-90s, and then the internet happened. That was a real big change for me. I immediately just got sucked in to a world. Yeah, I was that guy in front of that computer for 10 hours, but I saw it as something else. And because of that, it made me actually drop out of pharmacy school. And from there, I just really kind of followed my interest. And again, I've had plenty of failures. I started a music startup, failed really hard, went to work for a very large technology company. And during that time, it wasn't that I was bored during my job, but it was a very much like a 9 to 5. And 5 o'clock came and I turned on my journalism degree and I just started writing about everything. And I wasn't being paid. And by 2005, I knew that I wanted to be part of this conversation that was happening in this, I'm going to use the word culture loosely, and what was these small pockets in Paris, London, New York, and I was in Boston at that time. And I took a risk. I ended up quitting my day job at the age of 32 and essentially made no salary for almost 24 months. I was paying myself $1,000, but I was an adult. I was 32 years old. I was lucky that I had put some money aside. But it was a risk that at that point in my life I needed to take, or I would not be able to live with myself. I would not be able to go on and say, why didn't you try it? Because I did try it, and it was not easy. It was certainly not an overnight success. and 11 years on for me. Now it is. I mean, I think we have a lot of growth, and success to me is not that we're, the biggest website out there. It's that I've been able to find something that I love to do. I have 2 kids, raise a family, sustain it, and be able to, still come and enjoy talking to you guys day after day. So you're going to have, in my view, and I'm sure that our panelists have their own take, it's, are you ready to take that risk in your life? And if you are, you got to go 100% into it.
I think if you've, I think, who wants someone with a traditional CV? I mean, we're always looking for people who have not come up in a kind of cookie cutter way. So I think that, if I may be so bold, the things that you're interested in have perhaps not been that interesting. So I think that having an unusual education background is far more interesting now than someone who has come through in a more orthodox way.
And thank you for that.
Hi, Paul Rosengard. Thank you for a great presentation. Since we're at Parsons, I'm going to ask an education question. We're all educators, or we should be. We're all working with young people. What advice should we all be giving to students today? What skill sets do you see young people are missing?
May I? I think the scariest thing I'm seeing right now is we really need to start teaching them emotional intelligence. And what I mean by that is they are coming into the workforce with an idea of what it's going to be like, and that everything is going to go this way. And if they say this to someone, then it's okay. And if someone says this to them, then it's not okay. And they don't know how to connect. They've got all the intelligence that's been given to them educationally. However, we've failed to kind of guide them on the emotional intelligence scale of how to approach situations and how to problem solve in those. And that's the biggest challenge I've found with anyone who we've had to come in and lead. It's been really, really difficult. And by the way, that's not young people only. I think just because of civilization, it's also like made its way up to people who are 60. I don't know how, but that's how it's worked out.
Can I ask you a question on that? Does that come from experience, or that come from the academia side?
So I do believe that it has to be twofold. And the reason it now has to come from the academia side is just because we've changed so much in how we engage in the workforce. So, and the idea of education is that it's supposed to prepare you, right? And so if you're still educating the exact same way, then you can't really prepare people for what's next. So while there is that experience that goes into it, I do think that there are scenarios that education can play.
I think, building on that, I think you're completely right, that because we are now in all our respective industries driven completely by technology, when particularly in my world, when we can suddenly do something that we couldn't do before because of technology, because technology has improved it, people say, well, let's do it that way. I said, well, you could do it that way, but it won't work, because you're assuming that everything is transactional. It's about people and it's about relationships, and that's what you need. You need to understand that it's not just about what you can do in a digital way. It's not just about process, it's about people. And I think that emotional intelligence thing is a really, really important important element to not forget.
Claudia, so many of the students say they want to enter luxury branding. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what skill sets you think they should be working on while they're in school.
Well, a lot of luxury brands are international. And so your ability so we get back to what we've been talking about. It really is soft skills. And you're dealing with people from different cultures. And so you have to be capable of and willing to understand and understand that their priorities are also to some extent yours, while all the same time bringing this, because I assume if you're here, maybe you're you're interested in being part of an American subsidiary of an international luxury brand, bringing that American perspective, bringing that U.S. consumer perspective or that North America perspective.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ali Ick. You touched on, Jeff, balance in your last question, and I do think that's really important to kind of learn about, because as a student, I'm trying to find balance for myself in my studies, also entering the workforce. So I want to see how you guys see balance and how you go about that in your daily lives and with your work.
Something I say to a lot of the team that we have at work and the people that we interview is that in terms of balance, the most interesting people are the ones who've got something happening outside of work. You've got to have some passions that don't have to come into the work environment. You've got to want to leave, whether it's a long day or a short day at work, but you have to have some kind of passion that makes you leave the building and go, I'm going to go and, whether you're into rock climbing or playing records, or it doesn't matter. But, I think the most interesting candidates we get have incredible stories to tell about what they do outside of work. And once you've got a passion outside of work, I think you find a balance, because you can work 24 hours a day. It doesn't necessarily make you better or smarter than anyone else. So, working and kind of having sort of work-life balance has to, I think, have a sense of, within that, there's got to be a sense of what you personally and individually, whether you're, Jeff talks about being a family man, I am too, but there are things that I have personally carved out for my time, me time, which allows me to then balance everything else. And I think if you haven't got that, for me, it's like an anchor. So that's my advice.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sharon, and one of the points I was really impacted by was when you said leadership should start from being self-aware, and then you could lead other people. And then a big part of that was I've tried a lot of things like styling and business internships, and like knowing what you like and most importantly what you don't like through internships. Yeah, at the same time, I feel like I run the risk of not seeming goal-oriented if I go for another one. So my question for you would be, how do we still look goal-oriented that we want that position when we are still in that exploratory internship stage and we don't know what we exactly want?
This is gonna sound crazy, and I'll just say this, but just take it for what it is. The only reason it feels like that is because you are having to make decisions of your life based on other people's expectations. You feel like you're not goal-oriented because for so long people have told you that you need to be focused on one thing. But that's not true, because you're not one thing. So it doesn't mean you're not goal-oriented. Your goal could be, I want to experience many things. That's a goal-oriented statement. The problem is that we get into this habit of, this is the expectation of someone else, the expectation of someone else. And so then we no longer know how to connect with that. And that's why leading by self-awareness is so important. Because once you can do that, you are goal-oriented. But that's probably not a helpful answer.
No, it was very helpful. Like even just wanting to learn more, that being a goal, I've never really thought of it like that.
I think it's one thing that I'd like to say, which I think is very important, which people don't talk about enough, is that just because you're successful doesn't mean you're any good at what you do. And
If we're like a Pentecostal church, I would have said amen right now.
I am a firm believer that if you want if you're in part of your DNA is that you want to get to the top, you'll probably get to the top. Doesn't necessarily mean you're any good at what you do.
Right.
Often two very different things.
I'll spin that a little bit. If you're ever in a situation where you're talking to somebody that's a leader and you're like, man, sometimes I feel like I feel like I know a little bit more than him or her, then just keep on driving, because that shows you that there's an opportunity for you. So that's a great question.
I mean, just to illustrate that, I guess, just look at politics in every part of the world, and you get a pretty good example of what happens when you don't need any skills, but you can get to the top. I know we're trying to avoid politics, but I thought I'd just 30 seconds. Anyway,
I had a bingo card. I'd click bingo right now because we just did it. The one thing I will add is I always tell the folks in our company, just leverage hard, because you're gonna be fine. Like, you know what I mean? You may be in your 20s now, but this is nothing, you know. And I know that's cliche to say, and you certainly hear that quite often from peers and your professors. But the truth is that, you know, you can make a mistake and you can pick it up again. You know, the world forgives you, and you don't have to have all the answers right now. But I appreciate your drive, and you should certainly have that.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. It's a really meaningful and insightful panel so far. I came all the way from Los Angeles, and I'd say this is really worth it. I have a question. I'm curious about inspiration. How do you draw inspiration, whether it is strategy or your promotional videos or even designs, in a world where a lot of the things that consumers demand are pretty similar with one another, whether it's design or the materials? But how can you be unique and different, but still true to your goals and the heart of your company?
I think the word that we were talking about before we came out to talk on this panel was about quality. And I think that we live in a world now where there's a race to the bottom. And I think that I think you'd be surprised. I'm continually surprised, disappointingly surprised about the fact that not enough people you would think that would be obsessed with quality aren't necessarily obsessed with quality. They're obsessed with success. And I think that an obsession with quality is certainly the most important factor of everything that I've ever been involved with. Not necessarily personally, but specifically professionally, it's about quality.
I'd say also from where do we draw inspiration generally? We always say, if you work in the fashion industry and you talk to lots of people who work in the fashion industry, you can end up just talking to yourselves. The best place to look for inspiration is beyond. So go and find, look at what people are doing in science and technology. And, one of my heroes is David Attenborough, and I think about the way he presents the natural world and, has spent his whole life, professional life, he's 90-something years old, talking about, making really mundane subjects to most people, like a leaf, into an hour-long TV documentary that you could watch for 10 hours. And I think, inspiration comes from everywhere. Paul Smith wrote a brilliant book called You Can Find Inspiration in Everything. And I genuinely believe that. But you need to look beyond as well. So you need to make time and do the things that don't sit within the sort of core surrounds of fashion, and sort of stretch yourself by seeing things in different places.
We have a question here.
Hi, I'm Tay. I just have a quick question regarding what kind of advices you guys have for foreigners. I actually came here twice, and then having to go back to my country and then come back again because I really wanted to go do what I really wanted to do. And I'm not sure how many foreigners are in this room, but just wanted to know your advice on this.
As an employer in the United States, our company is about 180 people. We have about 120 sitting in Berlin, the rest in New York, as well as in London. And as a business, what's quite interesting is that we're really running into this from a couple sides. In our German office, 60% of our employees come from the UK. So we're really trying to understand how Brexit will affect us. I won't get into the Brexit thing right now, and that's something that it's not that we're so concerned about, but there's things that have to get put in order. Clearly in the United States, things are much tougher because one thing that we do is actually emigrate some of our best talent from our Berlin office into the United States because we act as a global company in order for the team in the US to really get a feel for what's happening. It's not easy. I think a student visa, I feel like, is a bit easier. That's not from the employer side. But what I would recommend is finding somebody that can give you real advice that you need around how to do what you need to do here. Because I certainly know it's not easy for a lot. But it seems like a student visa seems to be one of the easier ways to get in. The question is, from there it gets more difficult. And I apologize that is the way it is, because this is certainly a country that's always been, open arms to everyone. I wouldn't be here if my parents hadn't immigrated here. So.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. I think your journey is really tells a story of your courage and your persistence, and I think that that's very powerful. And while I absolutely second everything that Jeff said, it's also not easy on the employer side, but it's also true, and I have personally experienced where I've had people come into my organization and have exhibited this level of drive and persistence that as an employer, we also try to go above and beyond. So I would say to you, well done, and keep at it.
Thank you.
We have to get to her next. No, please go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Faye. Extend from his question. So I would like to ask some advice for, because we have so many people from the other part of the world come here for education, and I would say most people would like to maybe stay in the United States or go somewhere else to work, for example, in Europe or Asia. What would be the advice you would give to the leaders that in a different culture, they try to lead a team in a completely different culture?
Well, I work for a global company, and it's interesting that you use the word foreigner, because we're all foreigners. I mean, it depends where you start. But I think that not only because the way that we consume now and the speed in which information travels in some respects has shrunk the world, but also that old-fashioned Western imperialistic idea of Europe and North America just, I mean, has for quite some time not really played out in the industry, because the emphasis and the impetus and the power, the economic power, is elsewhere. And I think that one of the byproducts of that is that that all of us have been forced, regardless of whether we want to, in a cultural way, in terms of finance and the commercial side of our business, to be far more open. And actually, I think that the way that we have been forced to completely readdress the business. I mean, you look at the way the fashion industry has changed. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. So even though it can often feel as though things haven't changed, I think in a macro way they've changed enormously, and for the better.
Hi, my name's Natalie Tallis. Is this on? I actually graduated from Parsons in, I think, the precursor to this, the AAS Fashion Marketing Program. And one thing that we had kind of embedded is issues of sustainability and ethical production. And you represent so many different facets of the industry, and I'm just wondering how you've seen that change your coverage, change your brand, in terms of, you know, broader issues, global issues like climate change.
We actually look at it through the lens of responsibility today. I think that the sort of the quest is to get to being sustainable in everything that we do. And there's plenty of amazing companies out there. I just met with a company called Arvin Goods that's making some technical fabrics that's being used by Alix and Matthew Williams right now. And it's actually an American company, which is cool. But when we cover, we are thinking about this a lot. And we recently actually did a survey around this new young luxury consumer. And I was sharing this point with the panel earlier. Our studies have shown that a tremendous number of individuals, I think in one case, 85% of our audience polled said that they were willing to drop a brand that didn't have shared common values. Or they were willing to, I think 60% were willing to essentially make a decision on how they purchase based on the shared values that these brands had. So this is something that's definitely top of mind for our readers, and I'm sure it's top of mind in the industry. I guess the goal that we have is that eventually we're not telling the story on HighSnobiety of why something is sustainable. You know, why are we constantly reminding people that it almost becomes a norm that if you're not being responsible, rather, you know, that you're just not being a good citizen to the world. So what I will say is that from our surveying, our audiences are certainly thinking about this. This is information that we share with the market in general, and yeah, I think everyone's thinking about it.
Yeah, I think from an agency perspective, you know, responsibility and sort of morality sort of come from within. You know, if people want to work with certain types of brands and we want to stand for something, I think more and more people in our organization want to work with brands that they believe are doing the right thing, or ethically, you know, built or rebuilding. So whilst we work with brands like Levi's and Coca-Cola, you know, brands like Pentatonic or Noah, Christopher Raber, and a young designer from the UK, you know, these guys are all, I think, a sign of the kind of client list we'll have and grow over the next few years, because people want to work with brands that are coming from that place, from the origin, from the outset, whilst big companies are re-engineering themselves to be, you know, more sustainable and more, you know, positive for the environment.
I think we live in a very judgmental, quite rightly, a very judgmental world, and these days, if you're not transparent, you are opaque.
Yeah, transparency is huge. One thing that we've also learned from our studies is that people just want you to be honest, and they can read through the BS pretty quickly. Certainly, this new generation can. Yep. Any more questions for our panel?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, my name's Jay Margolis. What a great panel discussion. And one of the things from the beginning that was so exciting was you were talking about the consumer, and you were talking about people, and you were talking about how you get information. One of the things I'm seeing is time is affecting everybody, right? This consumer is harder, more and more difficult to read. The information that we gather from all the places we gather it, where? So one of the things, how do you teach students to see? How do you teach how to connect the dots? Where do you all look for those dots, and what do you see changing that's making this so difficult? Because distribution, product, speed to market, all become so difficult and so necessary to make it work. What's motivating you? What are you seeing that's changing that can make this all work?
From my point of view, being in media, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of crap out there. There is so much crap out there, and stuff we just don't need, don't want. Fake news, there's just rubbish. And I think that we are still lucky that enough people will come to our brand because they enjoy our taste or respect our taste, because basically that's all anyone ever has. Because you can access most things somewhere, and it's about your personal and professional curation, and that's what it comes down to. And I think that on the other side of that, the flip side of that is that we, as a media organization, have to be even more receptive to what's going on out there, because even though most of it is crap, some of it isn't, and some of it's really, really important.
I think, you know, in the world of customer experience, it really starts, your strategy starts first, and then the information comes next, because if you start with all the information that's coming in, you kind of don't know where you'll go. So you have to decide when you're in a company, is your company focused right now retention? If it is, what am I getting from my CRM analytics that will help me improve retention? Is it the traffic information? Is it heat mapping? So you have to decide what it is that's the core of it, and then what information helps you get that roadmap going, because otherwise and as it's called, big data is just sitting there. So it makes it easier to sift through that information.
I think it starts at the end of the food chain, and the end of the food chain is the client. And so if I'm singularly focused on what I know is really the thing that's going to move my business, then I'm focused on the client, and everything else is just retro planning and organization and the funneling of information to serve that. And that takes out a lot of noise.
Oh, we have to call it.
I think we do have to call it. It's been a really enlightening and wonderful panel. Some great questions from you guys too. I want to thank Jeff, Christopher, Dylan, Claudia, Raoul. Amazing. Please give them a round of applause.